The great hall of Nexus Prime stretched out like a metal ocean under artificial stars. Thousands of alien beings filled the massive chamber, their strange forms casting long shadows across the polished floor. Some had too many eyes, others had none at all. Some floated in the air, while others crawled on multiple legs. All of them had come to watch the same thing, the end of humanity. Commander Park, G1, stood with the other human survivors near the center of the hall. His gray uniform was clean but worn, like everything else about Earth's defeated military. Around him, the last leaders of humanity waited in silence. They knew what was coming. They had all agreed to it. Admiral Kim Sora stood to his left, her once proud shoulders now bent with defeat. General Lee Minho was on his right, staring at the floor. President Choi Young-mi looked older than her 60 years, her face marked by the weight of watching her world burn. They were the lucky ones. They had survived the war. The war had lasted only 3 months. Earth's armies had fought bravely, but they might as well have been throwing stones at the stars. The hegemony ships had appeared one day without warning, filling the sky like dark clouds. When the fighting ended, half of humanity was dead. The other half was about to become something worse than dead. High above them, the supreme archon of the hegemony sat on a throne made of living crystal. The alien leader was tall and thin, with skin that looked like polished metal. Its eyes glowed blue and seemed to look right through people. When it spoke, its voice appeared directly in everyone's mind without using words. We gather today to welcome a new servant species into our great empire, the Archon said, its mental voice echoing in every head in the chamber. The humans of Earth have chosen wisdom over destruction. They will join the 1,000 races that serve the hegemony with loyalty and peace. The alien audience made sounds of approval. Some clicked their claws, others hummed in strange harmonies. A few species that looked like giant insects buzzed their wings. They had all been through this ceremony before, either as watchers or as the ones being watched. The Archon gestured toward a group of smaller aliens near the throne. They carried silver devices that looked like metal spiders. The neural compliance. Implants will ensure that our new servants find joy in their service. They will never again know the pain of rebellion or the suffering of independent thought. Jiwan felt his stomach turn. The implants were the worst part. Every conquered species received them. They didn't just control behavior, they erased the very idea of freedom from the mind. The person remained, but their will to resist simply disappeared. Let the ceremony begin, the Archon declared. A platform rose from the floor in front of the throne. One by one, the human leaders were called forward. The process was simple. Walk up the steps, kneel before the Archon, and accept the implant. After that, they would return to Earth as perfect servants of the hegemony. Admiral Kim Sora was called first. She walked slowly up the platform, her military boots echoing in the silent chamber. At the top, she dropped to one knee and bowed her head. An alien technician approached and placed the spider-like device on the back of her neck. There was a brief flash of light, and it was done. When Sora stood up, her eyes were different, still human, but empty of something essential. She smiled a calm, peaceful smile and walked back to her place without looking at the others. General Lee Min-ho went next, then President Choi Young-mi. Each time, the result was the same. They knelt as humans and stood as servants. The alien audience watched with interest, like people observing a mildly entertaining show. More human leaders followed. Scientists, governors, military officers, all the people who had once made decisions for humanity. Now they would make no decisions at all. They would simply obey. The ceremony continued for over an hour. Jiwan watched his species surrender piece by piece. These were good people, brave people, who had fought impossible odds to protect their world. Now, they kneeled before their conquerors and smiled about it. Finally, only G1 remained. Human designation. Park G1. The Archon's voice filled his mind. You will approach and receive the gift of compliance. G1 looked up at the crystal throne. The Archon's glowing eyes focused on him with something like curiosity. Around the chamber, thousands of alien faces turned to watch. The other humans, his friends and colleagues, stood with their empty smiles, waiting for him to join them. He thought about his daughter, Minji, who had died in the bombing of Seoul. She had been only 8 years old, but she had been braver than most adults. When the siren started, she had helped get the younger children to the shelters. She had never given up, not even at the end. He thought about his wife, Yoon-hai, who had died defending the medical station where she worked. She could have run, but she stayed to help wounded soldiers. She had died free. He thought about Earth, about blue skies and green forests, and the sound of children laughing. All of it was gone now, replaced by gray buildings and alien machines. Human designation part, Jiwan, the Archon repeated, its mental voice becoming sharper. You will comply. Jiwan started walking toward the platform. Each step felt like walking through deep water. The chamber was absolutely silent, except for the sound of his boots on the metal floor. He could feel the weight of every alien eye watching him. He reached the platform and started up the steps. At the top, he stopped and looked directly at the Supreme Archon. The alien leader leaned forward slightly, its glowing eyes meeting his. You will kneel, the Archon commanded, its voice now carrying the force of absolute authority. G1 stood straighter. He clasped his hands behind his back in a military parade rest position. When he spoke, his voice was clear and calm and carried to every corner of the great chamber. No, the single word hit the chamber like a physical blow. The alien audience gasped, clicked, and buzzed in shock. Some of the more nervous species began moving toward the exits. The Archon's glowing eyes widened with something that might have been surprise. You will kneel, it repeated, its mental voice now filled with anger and confusion. No, Juan said again, louder this time. I will not kneel. I will not accept your implant. I will not serve your empire. Khan stood up from his throne, its tall form towering over the platform. You do not understand, human. Your species has already surrendered. Your leaders have already accepted their fate. You cannot change what has been decided. Ki Wan looked back at the other humans. Their faces showed no emotion, no understanding of what was happening. The implants had already taken their ability to care about freedom. But somehow, seeing them like that made his resolve even stronger. They surrendered, he said, turning back to the Archon. Teeny, then you will die, the Archon said, its mental voice now cold as space. Everyone dies, Juan replied. But not everyone lives free. The silence in the chamber was complete. For the first time in thousands of years, a conquered species had refused the ceremony. The foundation of the hegemony's power was absolute compliance. And one human had just cracked it with a single word. The Archon raised its hand, and energy began to gather around its fingers. But before it could strike, alarms began sounding. Throughout the station, emergency lights flashed red as automated voices announced security alerts in a dozen different languages. In the confusion that followed, Quan smiled. He had done what he came to do. He had said no, and somewhere in the galaxy, others would hear about it. The security alert saved G1's life. As the alarm screamed through Nexus Prime, chaos erupted in the Great Hall. Alien species scattered in all directions, their various forms creating a wild maze of movement. Some flew toward the ceiling, while others crawled under the seats. The Supreme Archon's attention turned from G1 to the emergency displays that appeared around its throne. In the confusion, a small figure in a medical uniform grabbed Ji-won's arm. "Sway quickly," she whispered in Korean. Before he could react, she pulled him toward a service door that had opened in the chamber wall. They ran through narrow corridors as the station shook around them. Behind them, the sounds of the panicking crowd grew fainter. The woman led him through a maze of passages that seemed designed for maintenance workers rather than visitors. "Who are you?" Ji-won asked as they stopped to catch their breath. "Han Nari," she replied, checking a small device on her wrist. "I was part of the medical team that examined the human prisoners before the ceremony. We don't have much time." They reached a small transport ship hidden in a loading bay. As they climbed aboard, Nari quickly started the engines. "Was my doing," she explained while working the controls. "I created a false emergency to cause confusion, but it will only buy us minutes." The ship lifted off and shot out of the station into the darkness of space. Through the viewport, Ji-won could see the massive bulk of Nexus Prime shrinking behind them. For the first time in months, he was free. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Earth," Nari said quietly, "to see what they've done to our home, Daddy." Took 3 days. During that time, Nari explained how she had survived the conquest. She had been working in a research facility when the hegemony arrived. Instead of fighting, she had pretended to surrender and offered her services as a medical expert. The aliens had accepted, wanting to understand human biology before the subjugation ceremony. "I learned about the neural implants," she said, as they traveled through hyperspace. "They don't just control behavior, they change the structure of the brain itself. The person remains, but their ability to think independently is destroyed forever." "Then why didn't you get one?" Ji-won asked. "Naya," I showed him a small device attached to her neck, hidden under her hair. "Neural inhibitor. I developed it in secret during the war. It blocks the implant signals and prevents the brain changes. But I only had enough material to make a few dozen of them." "A few dozen out of billions," Ji-won said. I chose carefully. Scientists, engineers, military officers, people who might be able to fight back someday. You were on my list, but you were captured before I could reach you." When they finally reached Earth, Ji-won barely recognized his home world. The blue and green planet he remembered was now covered in gray structures. Huge alien factories dotted the surface, connected by transportation tubes that stretched across continents. The oceans were darker, filled with strange machines that processed seawater for the hegemony's use. They landed in what had once been Seoul, renamed Processing Center 7. The familiar buildings were gone, replaced by identical concrete blocks that housed the human workers. Everything was gray and functional, designed for efficiency rather than beauty. "Most humans live in the processing centers now," Nari explained as they walked through the eerily quiet streets. "They work in the factories during the day and return to their assigned quarters at night. The implants make them perfectly content with this life." They were met by a small group of people who looked more alert than the others. These were the ones with neural inhibitors, the last free humans on Earth. There was Kang Soo-jin, an engineer who had helped design Earth's defensive systems. Kun Tai-ho, a pilot who had flown transport missions during the war. Bae Hun-woo, soldier who had fought in the final battles for the capital. "We saw what happened at the ceremony," Soo-jin said, her eyes bright with something the implanted humans no longer possessed. "Hope. The whole galaxy is talking about it." One human said no. "Hey, and now they're making us all pay for it," Tai-ho added. Grimly. Over the following days, Ji-won learned the full extent of the hegemony's response to his defiance. Human colonies throughout the galaxy had been attacked without warning. Orbital bombardments had destroyed entire cities. Millions had died in the first wave of retaliation, but worse than the killings were the forced implantations. The hegemony had decided that humanity was too dangerous to be allowed even the limited freedom other servant species enjoyed. Every human who survived the bombardments was immediately taken to surgical facilities where the neural implants were installed. By force. "They're trying to erase us," Hunwoo said, as they watched a group of implanted humans working in a nearby factory. "Not just kill us, but make us forget we were ever human." The implanted humans moved in perfect synchronization, their faces empty of expression. They worked without rest, without complaint, without any sign of the fire that had once defined their species. Children were separated from their parents and placed in educational facilities, where they learned to serve the hegemony with joy. "Look at them," Nari said sadly. "They're not human anymore. They're just ... tools." But even as they watched their species being systematically destroyed, reports began reaching them from across the galaxy. The news of Ji-Won's refusal to kneel was spreading faster than the hegemony could contain it. On distant worlds, other servant species were beginning to ask questions they hadn't asked in centuries. "The Zephyrians have stopped their tribute shipments," Sujin reported, reading from a stolen communication device. "They claim it's due to technical difficulties, but their compliance scores are dropping. The Warlock mining colonies are reporting increased accidents," Taiho added. "Production is down 30% across their entire system." "It's not much," Yunu said, "but it's something." Ji-Won stood, looking out at the gray landscape that had once been his vibrant homeworld. In the distance, he could see the lights of the alien factories working day and night to strip Earth of its resources. The sight filled him with a cold rage that burned deeper than any fire. "They think they've won," he said quietly. "They think that by destroying our bodies and controlling our minds, they've defeated humanity. Haven't they?" Nari asked. Ji-Won turned to face the small group of free humans. "No, they've made a mistake. They think compliance is the same as defeat. But as long as even one human refuses to kneel, as long as even one person remembers what freedom means, they haven't won." He looked up at the alien ships patrolling the sky above them. "They want to make us forget we're human. Instead, they're about to learn what that word really means." Over the following weeks, the small resistance group began to grow. Dr. Neri worked to create more neural inhibitors, while Sujin and Taiho established communication networks with other free humans scattered across the galaxy. Hunwoo trained the newcomers in basic combat skills and stealth operations. They started small, sabotaging factory equipment, freeing small groups of humans before they could be implanted, spreading the story of the man who refused to kneel. Each small victory came at a great cost. The hegemony responded to every act of resistance with brutal efficiency. But something had changed in the galaxy. The absolute certainty that had held the empire together for thousands of years was beginning to crack. Other species began to remember what they had lost. The hegemony's perfect order was becoming imperfect. And at the center of it all was one simple truth that no neural implant could erase. One human had said no. And that was enough to change everything. The galaxy was beginning to remember what defiance looked like. And the hegemony was starting to be afraid. 6 months after the ceremony, the resistance had grown from a handful of survivors to a network of cells operating across 12 star systems. Quan stood in the command center of their new base, hidden deep inside an abandoned asteroid mining facility. The rocky walls around him were covered with stolen star charts and intelligence reports. "We have a problem," Dr. Nari said, looking up from her laboratory equipment. "The hegemony is adapting, okay? Their new neural implants are designed specifically to counter our inhibitors." "We freed 17 humans from the processing station on Kepler 442, but only 3 of them stayed free. The others reverted to compliance within hours." Ji-Won studied the data on her screen. The brain scans showed how the new implants worked differently, creating multiple pathways of control instead of relying on a single signal. Okay, how long before they make the inhibitors completely useless? Maybe 6 months, maybe less. Across the room, Kong Soo-jin was working on a damaged communication array. "We're getting reports from the outer colonies," she said, without looking up from her work. "The hegemony is moving humans to more secure facilities, spreading families, spreading people across different systems to prevent organized resistance." Taiho floated in through the entrance, his pilot suit covered in space dust. "Okay, the supply run to the Beta Centauri cell was successful, but we lost 2 ships on the way back. The hegemony's patrol routes are getting more sophisticated. They're learning from our tactics," Bei Hoon-woo added. The soldier had been training new recruits in the base's gymnasium. "Every successful mission teaches them something new about how we operate." Okay. The war that we're fighting was unlike anything humanity had ever experienced. There were no front lines, no armies facing each other across battlefields. Instead, they fought in the shadows, striking at targets of opportunity and disappearing before the hegemony could respond. Their greatest weapon was not military might, but information. Every successful rescue mission was recorded and broadcast to resistance cells across the galaxy. The story of humans who refused to surrender spread like wildfire through the underground networks of a dozen species. "Show me the latest intelligence." Reports. G1 order.sujin activated a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy. Red dots marked hegemony strongholds, while blue dots showed areas of resistance activity. The pattern was clear. Wherever humans had successfully escaped or fought back, other species were beginning to show signs of unrest. "The Altarians have stopped reporting to their sector commanders," Taiho reported. "For mining operations, I'm running at 50% efficiency." The hegemony sent inspectors, but they found no obvious signs of rebellion. "The Andromedans are having similar issues," Hyun-woo added. "Equipment failures, work slowdowns, communication breakdowns. Nothing that can be traced to deliberate sabotage, but the effect is the same." Jiwon smiled grimly. "They're remembering how to resist without realizing it. The neural implants suppress rebellion, but they can't completely eliminate the desire for freedom." Dr. Nari looked up from her work. "There's something else. I've been analyzing the reports from our intelligence network. The hegemony's control system isn't just about the implants. There's something else, something that coordinates the mental conditioning across the entire galaxy." She brought up a new display showing energy patterns detected by their sensors. Every implanted being receives regular signal updates. The signals come from a central source, but we haven't been able to locate it. "Central control system," Jawan said thoughtfully. "That would explain how they can manage billions of minds across thousands of worlds." "If we could find it," Soo-jin said, "we might be able to disrupt the entire network." Their conversation was interrupted by an alarm. Park Sunmi, their communications specialist, looked up from her equipment with excitement. "We're receiving a transmission from the Proxima Centauri system. One of our deep cover agents has found something important." The transmission was brief and encrypted, but its contents changed everything. Agent Lee Do-yeon had infiltrated a hegemony research facility and discovered classified information about something called the Dominion Core. According to this, Sunmi read from the decoded message. The Dominion Core is an ancient artifact that amplifies psychic control across interstellar distances. It's located on a world called Terminus in the galactic core region. "How ancient?" Nari asked. "The report says it predates the hegemony by thousands of years. They didn't create it. They found it and learned to use it." Kwan felt a chill as he realized the implications. If this device has been controlling minds for thousands of years, then every species in the galaxy might be living under its influence. Not just the conquered ones, even the hegemony themselves, Hyun-woo said quietly. The discovery changed their entire understanding of the war they were fighting. Quote, the hegemony wasn't just another empire seeking to expand its territory. They were the instruments of something far older and more sinister, a system designed to keep the entire galaxy in mental chains. Over the following weeks, they focused their intelligence efforts on learning more about the PhD, more about the Dominion Core. What they discovered was both terrifying and hopeful. The device was incredibly powerful, capable of influencing minds across vast distances. But it was also incredibly old, and according to the stolen technical reports, it was showing signs of wear. The power fluctuations are becoming more frequent. Nari reported during one of their planning sessions. The hegemony's technicians are struggling to maintain it. Some of their own species are beginning to show signs of independent thought. That explains the increased security measures, Taiho said. They're not just trying to control us, they're trying to control their own people. The resistance began to plan their most ambitious operation yet. If they could reach Terminus and destroy the Dominion Core, they might be able to free every enslaved mind in the galaxy. But the world was the most heavily defended location in hegemony space, protected by entire fleets and automated defense systems. It's a suicide mission, Hyunwoo said bluntly. Even if we could get a strike team to the planet, the chances of survival are essentially zero. Then we make sure it counts, Ji-won replied. Dr. Neri, is there a way to turn the destruction of the core into something that will free the implanted minds? Nari had been working on this problem for weeks. Theoretically, yes, if we can create a feedback pulse when the core is destroyed, it might overload every neural implant in the galaxy. But the pulse would need to be precisely calibrated, and someone would need to be connected to the core when it happens. Connected how? Direct neural interface. The person would need to link their own mind to the core's network and use their brain patterns as a template for the freedom pulse. The room fell silent as everyone understood what this meant. Whoever made the connection would be torn apart by the feedback pulse. They would die, but their death would free billions of minds. I'll do it, Ji-won said immediately. No, Nari said firmly. It has to be someone who understands the neurotechnology, someone who can make the precise adjustments needed during the connection process. She looked around the room at her friends and colleagues. It has to be me. The argument that followed was intense but brief. They all knew she was right. The mission would require her expertise to succeed, and success would require her sacrifice. As they began planning the assault on Terminus, reports continued to arrive from across the galaxy. The resistance was growing stronger, but so was the hegemony's response. Entire star systems were being placed under martial law. The final battle was coming, and everyone knew it. But something had changed since that day on Nexus Prime, when one human had refused to kneel. The galaxy was remembering what freedom felt like. That memory was spreading faster than the hegemony could contain it. The underground war was about to become something much larger. The question was whether they could strike at the heart of the hegemony's power before it was too late. In the depths of space, hidden in asteroid fields and dead worlds, the resistance prepared for the battle that would determine the fate of every thinking being in the galaxy. They were still vastly outnumbered, still fighting against impossible odds, but they were no longer alone. That made all the difference. The message began broadcasting on every stolen frequency the resistance could access. Squan's voice, clear and determined, reached into the darkness of space where countless enslaved minds waited for something they had almost forgotten how to want. This is Commander Park, Ji-won of the Human Resistance. 1 year ago, I refused to kneel before the hegemony. Today, I speak to every being in this galaxy who remembers what freedom feels like. The transmission was simple but powerful. No fancy words, no complex ideas, just the truth spoken by someone who had chosen to stand rather than submit. We are human. We kneel to no one. Can neither should you. The response was immediate and electric. On Kalor Prime, a warrior named Vex dropped his tribute payment and walked away from the collection center. He had been a fighter once, before the implants made him docile. Something in Ji-Won's words awakened memories that the neural conditioning had. Buried but not destroyed, on the mining world of Pharaoh 7. A supervisor named Quillix found herself questioning orders for the first time in decades. Why did they need to work 18 hours a day when 12 would be enough? Why couldn't workers see their families more than once a month? The questions felt dangerous, but they also felt right in the Andromeda system. Merchant Captain Zune stopped his cargo ship in the middle of a delivery run. He stared at the manifest showing weapons being transported to suppress another rebellion on a world he had never heard of. For reasons he couldn't explain, he changed course and delivered the weapons to the rebels instead. The resistance monitored these small acts of defiance from their hidden bases. Each report brought hope, but also fear. They knew the hegemony would respond with overwhelming force. Revolution is spreading across 47 systems. Park Sunmi reported from her communication station, but the hegemony is mobilizing their fleet. They're moving ships from the core worlds toward the outer colonies. Captain Li Dayan had joined the resistance 3 months earlier when her transport ship was captured during a rescue mission. She had been a hegemony officer, flying supply runs between conquered worlds. Now, she commanded a small fleet of stolen ships crewed by freed humans and defecting aliens. We can't let them crush these uprisings one by one, she said during the strategy meeting. We need to give the rebels something to rally around, a victory they can see. Ji-Won studied the tactical displays showing hegemony fleet movements. Do you have in mind the shipyards at Kepler Station? They're building the new class of control ships, vessels designed specifically to suppress rebellions. If we can destroy them before they're completed, it sends a message to the entire galaxy. And if we fail, then we die fighting instead of hiding. The attack on Kepler Station became the Resistance's first major military operation. Dayan led a fleet of converted cargo ships and fighter craft against one of the most heavily defended installations in hegemony space. The battle was brutal and chaotic. Human pilots used tactics that confused and frustrated their enemies. Instead of following standard engagement patterns, they fought with creativity and desperate courage. They used their smaller ships to slip between the larger hegemony vessels, targeting weak points and then disappearing before the enemy could respond. Human ship, you are ordered to surrender, came the transmission from the hegemony fleet commander. Your resistance is futile. Submit and you will be granted quick deaths. Dan's response was broadcast on all frequencies so that every ship in the battle could hear it. This is Captain Li Dan of the Free Human Fleet. We don't surrender. We don't kneel, and we sure don't die quietly. The human fleet lost half its ships, but they accomplished their mission. The massive shipyards exploded in brilliant flashes that could be seen from 3 systems away. More importantly, the battle was recorded and transmitted across the galaxy. Within days, uprisings erupted on dozens of worlds. Species that had been peaceful servants for centuries suddenly remembered how to fight. The hegemony's response was swift and merciless. But each act of brutality only inspired more resistance. On Vorthon, the insectoid population stopped working the crystal mines and retreated into their underground tunnels. When hegemony forces tried to follow them, they found the tunnels had been collapsed, sealing the workers inside where they could not be reached. On Celestin, the floating cities simply disappeared into the planet's dense cloud cover. The hegemony spent weeks searching for them while their industrial production dropped to zero. The pattern repeated across the galaxy. Each species found their own way to resist, using abilities and knowledge that the hegemony had forgotten they possessed. But the most important change was happening among the hegemony's own people. Reports reached the resistance that several hegemony commanders had been arrested for showing mercy to rebels. Some had simply refused orders to attack civilian populations. Others had been caught secretly supplying resistance groups with weapons and information. The control system is breaking down, Dr. Han Nari reported from her laboratory. The Dominion Corps' influence becomes weaker as more minds break free from its control. Each act of resistance makes it easier for others to resist. However, this success brought a terrible revelation. Intercepted hegemony communications revealed their final plan. If they could not maintain control through the existing system, they would activate the Corps' ultimate function, complete neural reformation. Nari read from the stolen technical manual. Every thinking being in the galaxy would be reduced to the mental level of a simple animal. No more rebellion, because there would be no more independent thought of any kind. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The hegemony was preparing to lobotomize the entire galaxy rather than lose control of it. How long do we have? G1 asked. According to this, they need 6 months to prepare the core for the reformation process. After that, the change would be permanent and irreversible. The resistance faced an impossible choice. They could continue their successful campaign of inspiration and rebellion, knowing that success would trigger the destruction of every intelligent mind in the galaxy, or they could attempt their desperate mission to destroy the Dominion Corps, knowing that failure would doom billions of beings to eternal slavery. We go to Terminus, G1 decided. We end this before they can activate the final protocol. The preparation began immediately. Every resistance cell was contacted and asked to contribute ships, weapons, and volunteers for the assault. The response was overwhelming. Species that had only recently remembered how to fight volunteered to join the attack on the most heavily defended world in the galaxy. The Kali sent their few remaining warships, ancient vessels that had been decommissioned for centuries, but still carried the heart of their warrior culture. The Andromedans contributed their knowledge of advanced navigation, allowing the fleet to take routes that the hegemony would never expect. Most importantly, the recently freed species brought something the resistance had always lacked: hope on a galactic scale. What had started as a few dozen desperate humans hiding in asteroid bases had become a coalition of free peoples, determined to break the chains that had bound the galaxy for millennia. As the assault fleet gathered in the empty space between star systems, Juwan stood on the bridge of their flagship and watched the ships arrive. Hundreds of vessels from dozens of species, all united by a simple idea that one human had refused to abandon. The idea that freedom was worth fighting for? No matter the cost. The final battle was coming. Win or lose, the galaxy would never be the same. The spark that had been lit by a single act of defiance was about to become a fire that would burn across the stars. And at the center of it all, the Dominion Corps waited on Terminus, the ancient machine that had controlled countless minds for thousands of years. Soon, it would face an enemy it had never encountered before, an enemy that refused to kneel. The assault fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Terminus system like a swarm of angry insects. 300 ships from 50 different species, all united by the simple belief that freedom was worth dying for. G1 stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching as the defenders of Terminus scrambled to respond. The planet hung before them like a dark jewel, surrounded by orbital defense platforms and patrolling warships. At its center, buried deep beneath the surface, waited the Dominion Corps. Enemy fleet strength is overwhelming, reported Yuan Taiho from the tactical station. We count over 1,000 ships, plus the fixed defenses. They outnumber us 3 to 1. Good, said Captain Lee DeYoung with a grim smile. If the odds were fair, it wouldn't be a proper human fight. The battle began. With a thunderous exchange of weapons fire, that lit up the darkness of space. The hegemony ships were larger and more powerful. But the resistance fleet fought with the desperation of beings who had nothing left to lose. The Kali warriors threw their ancient ships directly at the enemy formations, their war cries echoing across the communication channels. The Andromeda navigators used their knowledge of space-time to appear behind enemy lines, striking at weak points before vanishing again. But it was the humans who fought with the most terrifying intensity. They had learned something during their months of resistance that the other species were only beginning to understand. Sometimes victory required sacrifice. Sometimes the only way to win was to be willing to lose everything. Breach in the orbital. Defenses, Sunmi called out from her station. Section 7 is clear. We have a path to the surface. Take us in, Jiwan ordered. The landing force consisted of 50 volunteers from a dozen species. Dr. Han, Nari carried the equipment needed to interface with the Dominion Corps. Bei Haiyan-Wu led the combat team that would protect her. Kong Sujin brought the demolition charges that would destroy the ancient machine, and Jiwan carried the burden of command. Knowing that he was leading most of these people to their deaths, the surface of Terminus was a nightmare landscape of twisted metal and dark energy fields. The planet had been shaped by millennia of serving as the hegemony's central command world. Ancient towers rose toward the black sky, their surfaces covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The core is 3 kilometers down, Nari said, checking her scanner. There's an access tunnel half a kilometer north of here. They fought their way across the surface while the battle raged in space above them. Hegemony ground forces attacked with weapons that turned matter into energy and energy into pain. But the resistance fighters pressed forward, each death buying precious meters of advance. The tunnel entrance was guarded by creatures that had once been living beings, but were now something else entirely. The hegemony's experiments with neural control had created monsters that existed only to serve and destroy. Through the door, Haiyan-Wu shouted, firing his weapon at the twisted guardians. Don't stop to fight them. Just run. They descended into the depths of Terminus, following passages that grew stranger and more disturbing with each level. The walls pulsed with organic rhythms. The air tasted of metal and despair. And always, pressing against their minds, was the presence of the Dominion Corps itself. I can feel it, Nari whispered as they approached the final chamber. Old, so hungry. K wants to consume every thought, every dream, every spark of independence in the galaxy. The core chamber was vast beyond comprehension. At its center stood a structure that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process. Energy flowed through crystalline conduits that connected to communication arrays, reaching out to every corner of galactic space, and surrounding the core were the Supreme Archon and its personal guard. You have come far, human, the Archon said, its mental voice echoing in the chamber. But you do not understand what you seek to destroy. The core does not merely control minds. It prevents something far worse from awakening. What are you talking about? Yuan demanded, raising his weapon. This galaxy was once threatened by entities from beyond the void. Beings of pure chaos who sought to unmake reality itself. The core was built to create order, to prevent the madness that would consume everything. By enslaving every thinking being, by ensuring that thought itself remained stable and controlled. Without the core's influence, the galaxy will tear itself apart. The chaos entities will return, and this time there will be no defense against them. Ji-Wan looked at the ancient machine, feeling its power pressing against his mind. For a moment, he almost believed the Archon's words. Maybe control was better than chaos. Maybe slavery was better than destruction. Then he thought about his daughter, Minji, who had died free, about his wife, Yuni, who had chosen to help others rather than save herself. About all the humans and aliens who had fought and died because they believed freedom was worth any price. Then we'll face that chaos as free beings, he said, not as your slaves. The battle in the core chamber was brief and brutal. The Archon's guards felt concentrated fire from the resistance team, but not before taking their own toll. Han Wu died protecting the demolition equipment. Taiho fell while covering their advance. In the end, only Juan and Nari remained standing. Before the Dominion core, need time to establish the neural link, Nari said, connecting her equipment to the core's interface. The feedback pulse has to be perfectly calibrated, or it won't work. The Supreme Archon, wounded but not dead, dragged itself toward them. You fools. You will doom the galaxy to madness. Maybe, Juan said, turning to face the alien leader. But it will be our madness, not yours. The final confrontation was not the epic duel that legends would later describe. It was a tired man and a dying alien fighting over the fate of countless worlds. G1's weapon was nearly empty. Khan's energy was failing. But both fought with the desperate strength of beings who knew this moment would determine everything. The link is established, Nari called out, her voice strained with effort. I can feel every enslaved mind in the galaxy. Billions of beings, all crying out for freedom. Do it, G1 said, driving his knife into the Archon's chest. The alien leader collapsed, its glowing eyes dimming to darkness. When the core explodes, the feedback pulse will use my neural patterns as a template, Kanya explained, her hands dancing over the controls. Every implant in the galaxy will receive a signal based on human brain activity, the signal of a mind that refuses to be controlled. Will it hurt? For me, yes. For them, it will feel like waking up from a very long sleep. Ji-wan watched as she worked, knowing these were her final moments. Dr. Han Nari had been brilliant, brave, and kind. She deserved to see the free galaxy she was about to create. Tell me what you think it will be like, he said, after. She smiled as she connected the final interface cable to her neural inhibitor. Chaotic, wonderful. Some worlds will have civil wars, others will celebrate. A few might try to rebuild the old system. Everywhere, people will have the choice. That's all we ever wanted. The choice. The choice to stand or kneel. The choice to serve or lead. The choice to love or hate or dream or hope. Her voice was fading as the core's energy began flowing through her mind. The choice to be human. The explosion, when it came, was not visible to the naked eye. It was a pulse of pure thought, carrying the pattern of human defiance across faster-than-light communication networks to every corner of the galaxy, on 1,000,000 worlds. Enslaved beings suddenly remembered who they had been before the implants stole their souls. A Kali warrior felt rage burn away centuries of enforced calm. An Andromedan scientist rediscovered curiosity that had been suppressed for generations. A Vorlok miner looked up at the sky and remembered that he had once wanted to fly among the stars. The galaxy convulsed as billions of minds broke free from their chains. Some worlds erupted in celebration. Others descended into chaos as freed slaves turned on their former masters. A few tried desperately to maintain the old order. But the tide of liberation could not be stopped. Ji-wan, dying from his wounds in the ruins of the core chamber, watched the destruction through the facility's viewports. Hegemony ships were surrendering or fleeing in all directions. The great empire that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years was collapsing in minutes. His communication device crackled with reports from across the known worlds. Freedom, voices called out in 100 different languages. We are free. Above Terminus, Captain Dane's voice came through the static. Commander, we've won. The entire hegemony fleet is standing down. Some ships are asking to join us. Good, G1 whispered, his strength fading. Tell them they're welcome. But tell them we don't kneel to anyone. As consciousness left him, Ji-Wan's last sight was of the stars visible through the chamber's broken walls. They seemed brighter somehow, as if the galaxy itself was celebrating its newfound freedom. Years later, historians would argue about what happened next. Some worlds formed democratic governments. Others chose tribal councils or corporate hierarchies or systems that had never been tried before. There were wars and alliances, triumphs and disasters, all the messy complications of free beings trying to live together, but in the center of the new galactic confederation. On a world that had once been called Earth, there stood a simple monument.